I'm Maria, 34, female, and my parents gave away the restaurant I funded for 8 years to my golden child brother at his engagement party. It wasn't just a business. It was supposed to be our family's legacy, a dream I had poured my heart, soul, and a significant portion of my life savings into. The moment the words left my father's mouth, I didn't just feel betrayed. I felt erased. It was as if my 8 years of sacrifice and support had been a footnote in a story that was always, and only, about my brother Leo. Our family restaurant, La Lanterna, was a charming little place nestled in a quiet, tree-lined street. It had warm brick walls, checkered tablecloths, and the constant, comforting aroma of garlic, basil, and slow-simmered tomato sauce. My mother, Sophia, had the recipes, passed down from her grandmother in Italy. My father, Antonio, had the personality, a booming laugh and a story for every customer who walked through the door. They had the heart of the restaurant, but I had provided its bones and its lifeblood. As a senior financial analyst, I had the means they lacked. I secured the lease, funded the renovations, bought the kitchen equipment, and for 8 long years, I covered every single financial shortfall without complaint. It was my name on the business bank accounts, my money that smoothed over slow winters and paid for unexpected repairs. This dynamic, where I provided the practical support while my brother received the praise, was not new. It was the fundamental architecture of our family. Leo, 6 years my junior, was the sun around which my parents orbited. He was the golden child, the one destined for greatness, while I was the quiet, dependable planet expected to maintain a steady course and never disrupt the system. The first time this pattern became painfully clear was when it came to our education. My parents had a modest savings account, earmarked for the kids' college fund. I had always imagined it would be split equally, a fair start for both of us. When I graduated high school with top honors and a clear plan to study finance, I was gently but firmly guided toward a state school. "It's a wonderful institution, Maria," my mother had said, her hand patting mine. "And so sensible. We have to be practical." I accepted it, believing practical was a virtue. I worked 2 jobs throughout my degree, took out student loans, and graduated with a mountain of debt but a fierce sense of accomplishment. 4 years later, when it was Leo's turn, the concept of practicality evaporated. He had scraped through high school with mediocre grades and a vague interest in business. Suddenly, the only acceptable option was a prestigious and incredibly expensive private business school 3 states away. When I cautiously questioned the expense, my father sat me down. "Maria, this is an investment in the family's future," he explained, his voice full of gravity. "Leo has a certain charisma. He's going to be the face of this family, make connections. Your education was to get a good, steady job. His is to build an empire." I was speechless. My good, steady job was apparently just a utility, while his undefined charisma was a long-term stock worth bankrupting the family savings for. They drained the entire college fund to pay for his tuition and living expenses. He spent 4 years living the high life, barely passing his classes, and graduating with a degree he seemed to have no intention of using in any meaningful way. Yet, at his graduation party, my parents beamed as if he'd single-handedly secured the family fortune. I stood by, the sensible daughter, with my student loan statements serving as a quiet reminder of my actual place. The disparity continued with smaller, yet equally telling moments. For his 18th birthday, a brand-new cherry-red convertible appeared in the driveway, a giant bow on its hood. Leo was ecstatic, and my parents watched him, their faces glowing with pride. For my 18th birthday 2 years prior, I'd been given a bus pass and a lecture on the importance of public transportation for building character. When I finally needed a car for my first real job, I was given the keys to the family's 10-year-old minivan, a rattling, cavernous vehicle that smelled faintly of spilled juice boxes and forgotten gym socks. "It's reliable," my father had declared, as if that was the only quality I required in life. When my parents first floated the idea of opening La Lanterna, I saw it as a chance to finally create something together, an asset that would belong to all of us. They were approaching their late 50s and dreamed of a place of their own. "Imagine, Maria," my mother would say, her eyes distant. Our own little corner of Italy right here. I was in my mid-20s, doing well at a major financial firm, and the idea was intoxicating. I could help make their dream a reality. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd been told to be. Sensible about my future and sketched out a plan. I would provide all the initial capital and establish a business line of credit, which I would personally guarantee. I would manage the books and cover any losses until the restaurant was profitable. The agreement, sealed with handshakes and heartfelt hugs, was clear. This was a family investment. My contribution was not a gift, it was a stake. The understanding was that once the restaurant was stable, I would either be bought out or remain a majority partner. It was a verbal agreement, cemented by what I foolishly believed was unbreakable family trust. That was my greatest miscalculation. For them, it was their dream. For me, it was my future, and I was handing it over without a single signature to protect it. For the first few years, La Lanterna was a whirlwind of shared purpose. I'd spend my weekends there, not as a financial analyst, but as a daughter, bussing tables, polishing silverware, or just sitting in a corner booth with my laptop, reconciling accounts while the comforting chaos of a dinner rush swirled around me. Leo was hired as the manager, a title that was generous at best. His primary function seemed to be charming the younger waitstaff and comping meals for his friends. He had no grasp of inventory, scheduling, or budgeting. The operational weight fell on my parents, and the financial weight fell squarely on me. Every few months, there would be a crisis. A walk-in freezer would break down, a supplier would unexpectedly raise their prices, or a stretch of bad weather would lead to a slow week. Each time, a call would come to me. "Maria, we're in a bit of a tight spot," my father would say, his voice laced with manufactured worry. And each time, I would transfer the necessary funds, reassuring them that we would weather the storm. It was our ship, after all, and I was determined to keep it from sinking. I never saw it as bailing them out. I saw it as investing in us. The delicate, dysfunctional balance of our family was thrown into disarray the day Leo announced his engagement to Isabella. Isabella was beautiful, polished, and radiated an aura of expensive perfume and ambition. She worked at an art gallery, a job that seemed to involve more networking at galas than actual work. From the moment she entered our lives, she treated La Lanterna less like a family restaurant and more like a charmingly rustic accessory for her curated lifestyle. "Oh, Leo, this place is just darling," she'd exclaimed on her first visit, glancing around as if appraising a piece of antique furniture. "It has such authentic potential." Her version of potential quickly became clear. The wedding planning began almost immediately, and it was a production of epic proportions. Isabella had a vision, and it was one of unrestrained opulence. The words budget and restraint were not in her vocabulary. She wanted a designer gown, a 10-piece band, and a destination honeymoon in the Maldives. Leo, completely captivated, agreed to everything. My parents, who had preached sensibility to me my entire life, were suddenly cheerleaders for this festival of excess. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime event, Maria," my mother would say dreamily. "Isabella's family has certain expectations. We want to give them the best." It was during this period that the financial emergencies at the restaurant escalated dramatically. The calls became more frequent, the amounts larger. "The price of olive oil has just skyrocketed," my father would claim. "We need a new commercial-grade espresso machine. Isabella thinks the old one is an eyesore," my mother would add. I was working long hours at my own job, and while the requests pricked at my analyst's intuition, I pushed my doubts aside. I was conditioned to help, to be the reliable one. I approved the transfers, telling myself it was for the good of the restaurant. I see now that I was funding the down payments on a lavish wedding venue and custom-designed invitations. The restaurant wasn't failing, it was being fleeced. I was so focused on keeping the ship afloat that I didn't realize its captains were secretly drilling holes in the hull to water their son's garden. An unsettling feeling began to creep over me. A few weeks before the engagement party, I had a conversation with my mother that should have been a massive red flag. I had called to discuss the previous month's profit and loss statement, which showed a staggering loss despite decent sales. "Mom, this doesn't add up," I said, my pen tapping on the spreadsheet. "The payroll costs are up 30%, but we haven't hired anyone. And what is this promotional expense for $5,000? There was a pause on the line. "Oh, that," she said, her voice suddenly airy. "Your father and I decided to give Leo a little bonus for all his hard work. Planning a wedding is so stressful for him." "A bonus? Mom, the restaurant is losing money. We can't afford to give out bonuses." "My money is what's covering these losses." Her tone shifted, becoming sharp and defensive. "Maria, please don't be so dramatic. It's family money. Leo is family. He needed it. You have your job, your salary. For him, this restaurant is everything." The conversation ended there, but her words echoed in my mind. For him, this restaurant is everything. What was it for me? Was I just a bank? A silent partner whose only role was to sign the checks. The engagement party was to be held at La Lanterna. My parents insisted it was the only appropriate venue. "We'll close to the public for the night," my father announced proudly. "It will be a celebration for family and our closest friends." I helped them prepare, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. The restaurant was decorated to Isabella's exacting specifications, with fairy lights, white roses, and customized cocktail napkins. As guests began to arrive, my parents were the perfect hosts, beaming with pride. They kept hinting at a very special announcement they were planning to make during the toasts. "Just you wait," my father whispered to me, giving me a conspiratorial wink. "It's a big night for this family." I forced a smile, assuming they had bought the happy couple a car or were presenting them with a check for their honeymoon. The thought that the surprise could be anything else, anything that directly involved my 8 years of sweat and sacrifice, never even crossed my mind. The capacity for that level of betrayal was something I had not yet learned to imagine. The restaurant was buzzing with a joyful energy that felt completely alien to me. Laughter echoed off the brick walls as cousins and family friends mingled, champagne flutes in hand. Isabella floated through the room in a silk dress, her hand permanently attached to Leo's arm, a radiant smile fixed on her face. My brother looked like a man who had just won the lottery, basking in the glow of being the center of everyone's universe. I stood near the bar, nursing a glass of sparkling water, feeling like a ghost at my own feast. My uncle Matteo, my father's younger brother, found me there. He was a quiet, observant man with kind eyes, a carpenter by trade who valued hard work and honesty above all else. He was the only one in the family who seemed to grasp the true extent of my involvement in the restaurant. "It looks beautiful tonight, Maria," he said, gesturing around the room. "You should be proud. None of this would be here without you." A lump formed in my throat. "Thanks, Uncle Matteo. Mom and Dad did most of the decorating." He shook his head, his gaze steady. "I'm not talking about the flowers. I'm talking about the walls, the tables, the lights being on. Your father tells me business is booming. That's a credit to you." His words were a small balm on my frayed nerves. It was a simple acknowledgement, a recognition that was so starkly absent from my own parents. Just then, my father tapped a spoon against his glass, calling for everyone's attention. The cheerful chatter subsided, and all eyes turned to him as he stood in the center of the room, my mother and the happy couple flanking him. "Friends, family," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "Sophia and I are the happiest parents in the world tonight. Our son, Leo, has found the most wonderful young woman in Isabella, and we are so excited to welcome her into our family." He paused, beaming at Isabella, who gave a modest little dip of her head. A parent wants nothing more than to see their children happy and secure. We want to give them the best possible start in their new life together, a foundation on which they can build their future. He looked from Leo to Isabella, his eyes shining. I felt a pang of something, envy, perhaps, that he had never looked at me with that same unrestrained pride. He was building up to the big surprise. I braced myself for the announcement of a lavish gift, a down payment on a house, maybe. Then he raised his glass high. "And so, as a symbol of our love and our belief in them, Sophia and I have decided to give them that foundation. We are thrilled to announce that we are gifting our son, Leo, and his wonderful fiancée, Isabella, full and complete ownership of La Lanterna. The words hung in the air for a fraction of a second before the room erupted in applause and cheers. For me, that fraction of a second stretched into an eternity. The sounds of the party faded into a dull roar, like the ocean heard from inside a seashell. The smiling faces blurred into a watercolor wash of color and movement. All I could see with perfect, horrifying clarity were the faces of my family. Isabella's gasp of feigned surprise was a masterpiece of theater, her hands flying to her mouth as she turned to Leo with wide, tear-filled eyes. Leo puffed out his chest, a look of pure, unadulterated triumph spreading across his face. He wrapped an arm around Isabella, pulling her close, the picture of a young king claiming his throne. But it was the faces of my parents that broke me. They weren't looking at the crowd. They were looking directly at Leo, their expressions filled with a profound, unconditional love and pride that I now understood was reserved only for him. They were giving away my work, my investment, my security, and they looked happier than I had ever seen them. In that moment, I wasn't just forgot. I was invalidated. My 8 years of funding, of covering losses, of late-night phone calls and weekend work, all of it had been conceptually transferred to them, transformed into a grand gesture of parental love that I had no part in. I was the anonymous donor whose name was never read aloud at the charity gala. The applause felt like a physical force pressing in on me. I couldn't breathe. My heart was pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. I saw Uncle Matteo across the room, and his eyes found mine. The smile had vanished from his face, replaced by an expression of deep shock and concern. He knew. He was the only one who did. I couldn't stay. I couldn't stand there and watch them toast to my erasure. Without a word to anyone, I set my untouched glass down on the bar. I turned and walked, my legs feeling strangely disconnected from my body. I moved through the celebrating crowd, a specter of my own making, and pushed open the heavy oak door. The cool night air hit my face like a slap, sharp and real. It was the first real thing I had felt since my father started speaking. I walked out of La Lanterna, the restaurant built with my money, and didn't look back. I walked for what felt like hours, the celebratory sounds of the party fading behind me, replaced by the quiet hum of the city at night. My phone buzzed in my purse, a relentless series of vibrations against my hip. I knew who it was. My mother, my father, Leo. Their joy had likely been momentarily interrupted by the realization that the family's cash machine had quietly exited the building. I ignored them. I needed the silence to process the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. It was so audacious, so complete, that my mind struggled to accept it as reality. I spent the night at a hotel, a sterile, impersonal room that felt like a sanctuary. The next morning, fueled by a sleepless night and lukewarm coffee, a cold, hard clarity began to settle in. The shock and hurt were still there, a dense weight in my chest, but they were now joined by a powerful, crystalline anger. They had not just given away a restaurant, they had given away my trust, my future, and my past, all in one grand, public gesture. By noon, there were over a dozen missed calls and a flood of text messages. From my mother, "Maria, where are you? You worried us sick leaving like that." From my father, "Call me. We need to talk about your behavior last night." From Leo, "What was that about? You ruined the end of my party." Isabella was really upset. His message was the one that solidified my resolve, my behavior, his fiancée's feelings. There was no concern for me, no question of why I might have been upset. I was simply an inconvenience, a loose thread in the perfect tapestry of his happiness. I took a deep breath and called a number I knew my whole family shared. My parents' landline. My father answered on the first ring, his voice a mixture of relief and irritation. "Maria, finally, your mother has been beside herself. What is going on with you? Leaving your brother's engagement party without a word." "I want to talk to you, Mom, and Leo all at once," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "Put me on speakerphone." There was a grumble, a brief shuffling sound, and then my mother's anxious voice. "Maria, honey, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Mom." "Leo's here too," my father announced. "Now, what is this about?" "Last night," I began, keeping my tone level and calm, "you announced that you were giving La Lanterna to Leo and Isabella." "It was a surprise," my mother chirped, "a wonderful gift to start their new life." "It was a wonderful gift," I agreed. "A very, very expensive gift. A restaurant that, for the past 8 years, has only remained open because I have personally funded it." Silence. I could picture them perfectly. My father's face clouding over, my mother wringing her hands, Leo shifting uncomfortably. It was Leo who spoke first, his voice defensive. "What are you talking about? Mom and Dad run the restaurant. I manage it." "You manage it, Leo," I said, the word tasting like poison. "But who pays the rent when sales are down? Who covers payroll when you overstaff for a Tuesday night? Who paid for the new ovens, the new walk-in, the new POS system? Who signed the personal guarantee on the line of credit that keeps the lights on? I did, every single time." "Maria, that's not fair," my father interjected, his voice rising. "We are a family. The money, it's all family money. It goes where it's needed." "Exactly," I said, my voice hardening. "It goes where it's needed. And for 8 years, I have poured hundreds of thousands of dollars into what I believed was a family asset, an investment in our future. But last night, you made it very clear that it's not a family asset. You publicly declared it a personal gift to Leo. You transferred the ownership, in word if not yet in deed, entirely to him." "He's our son, Maria," my mother cried, her voice cracking. "He needs this. He's starting a family. You have your career, your big salary. You don't need a restaurant." That was it. The core of their thinking, laid bare. My success wasn't something to be proud of. It was a resource to be tapped for the benefit of their favored child. My needs were irrelevant because I was self-sufficient, a quality they had both demanded and now used against me. "You're right," I said, and the quietness of my voice seemed to startle them. "I don't need a restaurant, and Leo apparently does, so he can have it. He can have the brick walls and the checkered tablecloths and the title of owner. But my involvement ends today." "What do you mean?" my father asked, a note of genuine confusion in his voice. "I mean the Bank of Maria is closed," I stated, each word precise and sharp. "Effective immediately, I will no longer be funding any of La Lanterna's expenses. No more covering payroll, no more paying suppliers, no more rent subsidies. The business line of credit, which is tied to my personal accounts, will be frozen. The restaurant is now Leo's. The financial responsibility is now his, too. I am divesting completely." The explosion was instantaneous. "You can't do that," my father roared. "You'll ruin us, you'll ruin your brother." "You are being selfish, Maria," my mother sobbed. "How can you be so cruel, after all we've done for you?" "You're just jealous," Leo shouted. "You're jealous that for once, something wasn't about you and your money." The absurdity of his accusation was almost laughable. I had made sure everything was about them, for years. I had funded their dream, subsidized his lifestyle, but I didn't laugh. I felt a profound, chilling emptiness. They didn't see me. They couldn't. "This conversation is over," I said calmly. "My decision is final. I will have my lawyer contact you regarding the formal dissolution of our business arrangement. Goodbye." I ended the call before they could respond, my hand trembling slightly as I set the phone down. The weight in my chest had shifted. The hurt was still there, a deep, primal wound. But for the first time in my life, I felt a flicker of power. I had finally stopped being the steady, dependable planet. I had just knocked their son out of the sky. The first few days after the phone call were deceptively quiet. I focused on my work, finding a strange comfort in the logical, unemotional world of spreadsheets and market analyses. I contacted my lawyer, a sharp woman named Alina, and instructed her to begin the process of untangling my finances from the restaurants. The first step was freezing the business line of credit and notifying the bank that I would no longer be guaranteeing any of La Lanterna's debts. It was a simple, Clean, legal maneuver. The quiet, however, was just the calm before the storm. About a week later, the first wave hit. My phone began to light up with calls from unknown numbers. When I finally answered one out of curiosity, it was a frantic produce supplier for the restaurant. "Ms. Rossi, your father's check bounced. He said you'd cover it." I politely informed him that I was no longer financially associated with La Lanterna and that he should direct all inquiries to the new owner, Leo Rossi. After the third such call from a linen service and a wine distributor, I changed my number. Then came the emails and the texts to my new number, which Leo must have gotten from a cousin. They started as desperate pleas from my mother. "Maria, please, the staff can't be paid. You can't do this to them." They quickly morphed into angry, accusatory diatribes from my father. "You are destroying this family out of spite. Your grandmother would be ashamed of you." Leo's messages were a mix of petulant whining and threats. "Isabella is crying all the time. You've ruined everything. You'll regret this." I blocked their numbers and set up a filter to send their emails directly to a folder for a leaner to review. I refused to be drawn back into their drama. My boundary was set. Their inability to reach me led to the next level of escalation. They started showing up. The doorman at my apartment building buzzed up one evening. "Ms. Rossi, your parents are in the lobby. They say it's an emergency." "There is no emergency," I said, my voice firm. "Please inform them I am not available and that they are not welcome here." I watched from my window as the doorman relayed the message. I saw my father's face contort with rage. He started shouting, gesturing wildly. My mother burst into tears. It was a performance for the woman for any residents passing through the lobby. It was humiliating, but I held firm. They eventually left, but the incident left me shaken. My home no longer felt like a safe haven. I had naively assumed that would be the worst of it. I had underestimated their desperation and their profound sense of entitlement to my life and my resources. The final line was crossed on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of a quarterly presentation to my firm's senior partners, standing at the head of a gleaming mahogany conference table. My boss, Mr. Davenport, and the entire executive team were listening intently as I walked them through market projections. Suddenly, the conference room door opened, and Mr. Davenport's executive assistant leaned in, her face pale and flustered. "Mr. Davenport, I am so sorry to interrupt," she whispered, her eyes wide with alarm. "But there's a situation in the lobby. A man and a woman are demanding to see Maria Rossi. They're causing quite a scene." A cold dread washed over me. It couldn't be, not here. Mr. Davenport frowned. "Who are they?" "They say they're her parents," the assistant stammered. They're yelling, saying their daughter is trying to bankrupt them and that this company has turned me against them." The entire room went silent. All eyes, which moments before had been on my presentation, were now on me. I could feel the blood drain from my face. The professional, competent world I had so carefully built for myself was being invaded by the chaos I had tried to escape. Mr. Davenport, a consummate professional, stood up. "Eliner, please handle this," he said to his assistant. To the room, he announced, "Let's take a 15-minute recess." To me, he said quietly, his expression unreadable, "Maria, my office." I followed him on numb legs, the humiliation burning in my cheeks. From his office window, we could see the lobby. There they were. My father, his face red and blotchy, was waving his arms, his voice carrying faintly through the thick glass. My mother was sobbing uncontrollably, clutching a handkerchief to her face, leaning against him for support. They had escalated their lobby performance from my apartment building to my corporate headquarters. Security guards were trying to reason with them, but they were relentless. "Maria," Mr. Davenport said, his voice calm but serious. "I value your work here immensely, but this cannot happen. Our firm has a reputation to maintain. This is a security issue." "I understand, Mr. Davenport," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "I am so sorry. It will never happen again." He nodded, "See that it doesn't." By the time I got back to the conference room, security had escorted my parents out of the building. The presentation was ruined. The partners looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. In the span of 10 minutes, my parents had managed to undermine 8 years of my professional credibility. That was the breaking point. This was no longer just a family dispute, it was an attack on my livelihood. The moment I got home, I called my lawyer. "Eleanor," I said, my voice shaking with rage. They showed up at my office. They made a scene in front of my boss and the senior partners. Eleanor was silent for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was steel. "Okay, Maria, they have crossed a legal boundary. This is now harassment. We are done with polite requests. I am drafting a cease and desist letter to be delivered by courier tomorrow morning. It will state, in no uncertain terms, that any further contact with you, your place of business, or your colleagues will result in immediate legal action, including a restraining order. We're done playing defense." Hanging up the phone, I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with profound sadness. I was now formally threatening legal action against my own parents. The family I had once cherished was gone, replaced by adversaries in a conflict I never wanted. They had left me no other choice. The cease and desist letter, delivered by a grim-faced courier to my parents' home and to the restaurant for Leo, was the legal equivalent of a declaration of war. Their reaction was predictably explosive, but now their avenues for directing that rage at me were cut off. They couldn't call, they couldn't text, and they certainly couldn't show up at my office again. So they turned their fury on the only audience they had left, our extended family. A smear campaign began. According to the narrative spun by my parents and Leo, I was a cold, cruel, money-obsessed daughter. They claimed my success had corrupted me, that I had abandoned them in their time of need over a petty jealousy of my brother's happiness. They twisted the story of the engagement party, painting me as a drama queen who couldn't stand to see her brother get a leg up in life. They conveniently omitted the 8 years of my financial support, or framed it as a small loan I was now using as a weapon. For a wee ek or two, it worked. I received a few hesitant texts from cousins and aunts asking if I was okay, but also subtly probing, trying to understand my side of this horrible story they were being told. I didn't engage. Explaining myself felt like a defense, and I knew I had nothing to defend. The turning point came, as I knew it would, from Uncle Matteo. He had been silent since the engagement party, watching and listening. The news of my parents' stunt at my office reached him, followed by their vitriolic stories. It didn't sit right with him. Matteo was a man of quiet integrity, and he knew me. He knew the daughter who had worked 2 jobs for her education and the niece who had always been responsible and generous. The person my parents were describing was a stranger to him. He decided to take matters into his own hands. Without telling me, he called a family meeting. He invited my parents, Leo, and all our local aunts and uncles. He told them it was time to clear the air for the good of the family. My parents and Leo arrived, confident that they had the family's sympathy and that this meeting would be a forum to further cement my status as the villain. The meeting was held at Uncle Matteo's house, in his large, comfortable living room. My aunt later told me every detail of what transpired. My father began, launching into his now practiced speech about my betrayal. He spoke of his dreams for the restaurant, of his desire to provide for his son, and of his heartbreak over his daughter's unforgivable actions. My mother sat beside him, weeping softly into a tissue, a picture of maternal suffering. When he finished, the room was quiet. Then Uncle Matteo spoke, his voice calm and measured. "Antonio, I hear your pain, but I have a few questions." My father nodded, looking magnanimous. "Of course, anything." "You said you built this restaurant with your own 2 hands," Matteo began. "But I was there when you were planning it. You couldn't get a loan from any bank. Where did the startup money come from?" My father faltered. "Well, it was a family effort." "Was it?" Matteo pressed. "Or did Maria, at 26 years old, liquidate her investment portfolio and provide every single dollar for the down payment, the renovations, and the initial inventory?" A murmur went through the room. My father's face paled slightly. "She wanted to help." "Okay," Matteo continued, undeterred. Let's talk about the last few years. You said business was good. But last winter, during that bad snowstorm, you told me you almost had to close for a month. Yet you didn't. You paid your staff, your rent, your suppliers. How? We managed, Antonio said gruffly. Did you? Or did Maria transfer $15,000 from her personal savings to the business account to keep you afloat? The air in the room grew thick with tension. My mother stopped crying and stared at Matteo, her expression hardening. And Leo, Matteo said, turning his gaze to my brother, who was suddenly looking very small on the sofa. You are the manager. Your father says you work very hard, but your salary and the salaries of all the staff have been paid from a business account. Who is the primary signatory on that account? Is it you? Is it your father? Leo just stared at his hands. Matteo let the silence hang for a moment before delivering the final blow. He reached for a large manila envelope on the coffee table. My brother and his wife have told you all a story about their ungrateful daughter. After they were served with a legal notice, Maria's lawyer contacted me, not to ask for my help, but because Maria listed me as a trusted family member. The lawyer, with Maria's permission, sent me this. Not to show anyone, but so that I would understand the facts. He opened the envelope and pulled out a sheaf of papers. These are bank statements, 8 years of them. They show every single dollar Maria has put into La Lanterna. Initial investment, covering monthly losses, emergency repairs, equipment upgrades. The grand total, he said, his voice ringing with authority, is just shy of $400,000. A collective gasp went through the room. She never said a word, Matteo continued, his voice softer now, but filled with a sorrowful anger. She never asked for praise, she just did it, because she loved her parents and she believed in their dream. The gift you all heard about at the engagement party, Antonio and Sofia didn't give away their restaurant. They gave away Maria's investment. They gave away her trust and her future. And when she finally, rightfully, decided she would not be a silent, open wallet anymore, they tried to ruin her reputation and her career. He looked directly at my father. You didn't just betray your daughter, Antonio. You lied to this entire family. You used her, and now you are trying to destroy her. The tide didn't just turn, it was a tsunami. The room erupted. Aunts and uncles who had offered my parents empathetic ears were now looking at them with disgust. The illusion they had so carefully constructed was shattered, and the ugly truth was laid bare for everyone to see. The family had not turned against me. They had, in one stunning, revelatory moment, turned against them. The fallout from Uncle Matteo's family meeting was swift and absolute. My parents and Leo left his house in disgrace, stripped of the victimhood they had worn like a shield. The family they had tried to rally to their cause now saw them for what they were: users, liars, and masters of breathtaking favoritism. The phone calls and texts of support, which had once been directed at them, now started coming to me. I was inundated with messages of apology, love, and outrage on my behalf. The practical consequences of my financial withdrawal were just as brutal. Without my constant cash infusions, La Lanterna began to crumble. Leo, faced with the actual responsibilities of ownership, paying suppliers, managing payroll, covering rent, was completely overwhelmed. He had no business acumen, no work ethic, and no money. He and Isabella, whose vision of being glamorous restaurateurs did not include bounced checks and calls from debt collectors, began to fight constantly. The dream of a lavish lifestyle, funded by my labor, evaporated into the harsh reality of bills and consequences. Within 3 months, La Lanterna closed its doors for good. The cheery red and white awning was taken down, and a for-lease sign was plastered on the window. The failure was a public monument to my parents' folly and my brother's incompetence. Shortly after, the wedding was called off. Isabella, seeing that her golden goose was, in fact, just a regular goose with empty pockets, broke the engagement and quietly disappeared from our lives. Leo, humbled and broke, was forced to get a real job, working in the warehouse of a distribution company. My parents became social pariahs within our own family. They were no longer invited to Sunday dinners or holiday gatherings. The family, led by Uncle Matteo, had closed ranks around me. They had created a new sense of family, one built not on obligation and deceit, but on mutual respect and truth. A year has now passed since the engagement party. The anger and hurt have faded, replaced by a quiet, settled peace. I used the money I was no longer pouring into the black hole of the restaurant to make a down payment on a beautiful condo overlooking a park. It's all mine. The name on the deed is mine, the mortgage is mine, and the sense of security it gives me is something no one can ever take away. My relationship with my extended family has never been stronger. We have regular dinners, hosted at my new place or at Uncle Matteo's. We laugh, we share stories, and we support each other. My parents and Leo are never mentioned. It's as if a toxic presence has been surgically removed, allowing the rest of the body to heal. I hear scraps of information about them sometimes, that my parents had to sell their house and move into a small apartment, that Leo is still struggling. I feel a distant pang of sadness for the family I thought I had, for the parents I wished they could have been. But I don't feel guilt. I learned a powerful, painful lesson. I learned that love and family cannot be sustained by one-sided sacrifice. I learned that trust, once broken so completely, cannot be repaired. And I learned that sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from the people who refuse to see your worth. I stopped trying to earn their love and approval and discovered that I never needed it to be whole. So Reddit, I'm left with a fractured family and a clear conscience. I sleep well at night knowing I stood up for myself, but there's a part of me that still mourns the family I thought I had. It's a strange peace, bought at a very high price, but it's a peace I wouldn't trade for anything. I chose my own well-being over their dysfunction, and in doing so, I finally found a home within myself.